Hello, my name is Alondra, and I am arguing why Ukraine should not accept a ceasefire deal from Russia. So, just to begin with, there's two main reasons why Ukraine should not accept this deal. It undermines Ukraine's sovereignty, which is absolutely vital to maintaining its democracy, and it's just cementing Russia's gain on Ukraine, and it's rewarding Russia's aggression. It's legitimizing Russia's invasion over the annexed areas like Crimea and Luhansk. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Obviously, Ukraine wants territorial integrity, but Russia wants autonomy over these areas. So it's just it wouldn't work out for either nation. Also, this is a illegal land grab from Russia, so a ceasefire is just it's legitimizing this land grab, and it's setting a very dangerous precedent, whether that be for Russia in the future and its future invasions of more eastern territories that it wants to continue invading, or other countries like China in the South China Sea that is wanting to invade Taiwan, or wanting to invade other nations and expanding its power, or it's expanding its sphere of influence. Also, Russia has a history of violating agreements. Look no further than the Minsk agreement. It was meant to bring peace to Eastern countries. Clearly, it did not. So it kind of goes to show how Putin is not good with ceasefire agreements. He is not ready to make a ceasefire agreement. He has said in I don't know if it was a press conference or an interview, he said that he's ready to freeze the war. But he wants to do a ceasefire agreement deal with Ukraine at the front lines, meaning basically only direct communication with Russia and Ukraine. This would not be involving France, the US, other NATO countries. We go back to the idea of balancing powers and how smaller nations, or nations that are more vulnerable, are taking in other superpowers, or are taking in bigger countries that have a bigger military, more political power in an international setting, to balance out its power against another global superpower. In this case, Ukraine would bring in France, bring in NATO, bring in the US to balance out against the global superpower of Russia. Putin not wanting anyone else at the table but Ukraine, it would just make it so that Ukraine is not getting the ceasefire agreements that are absolutely needed in this case. Also, the professor had mentioned before how this may seem as a type of Cold War, and I'm starting to get that more. Putin had said that if Western missiles, which were given to Ukraine by the West, being the US, being NATO, being France, being these other countries. Oh, I forgot to mention that, going back to having Ukraine at the front lines of the ceasefire agreement deal, there have been talks of having a Normandy format, this being France, Germany, Russia, Ukraine. Again, these are the balancing powers. This is what is needed to get to a fair agreement, to get to a fair ceasefire. But again, Russia does not want this. Going back to what I was mentioning earlier, the Western missiles that were being given to Ukraine. Putin had said that if these Western missiles are launched into Russia, then he considers this an act of war or an act of aggression and will act so accordingly against NATO. He is causing a war through Ukraine to either get to the other nations, to start a conflict with the other nations, or to just gain more power. Again, this is why Putin is not ready for a ceasefire deal. He may say he is. He's making so many excuses, so many assumptions as to not make a ceasefire deal so he can go through with these other maybe topics he has in mind, like acting accordingly to missiles being launched from Western alliances. So at this point, if a ceasefire is to be made, it must be in there that Ukraine has to be rebuilt. This should be done through the investment proceeds that were generated from frozen Russian assets. Russia has to take responsibility. Russia has to take some form of responsibility to rebuild the the unstable region, land, people of Ukraine. People are displaced, people were obviously killed, infrastructure is taken down, cities were torn down. Russia should be responsible for rebuilding this because this will cause long-term instability. At this point, Ukraine should return to its neutrality. The whole reason for this conflict was because Russia felt a threatening force from NATO expanding to its eastern countries that were bordering Russia. At this point, the Ukraine cannot work towards a NATO membership. Maybe further down the road, they can consider an EU, like the European Union membership, but at this point, Ukraine has to return to its neutrality post-conflict, of course. If a ceasefire is reached, it calls into question U.S. credibility because they were helping Ukraine, and in a sense, a ceasefire, depending on what is there, of course, it could mean the U.S. lost against Russia. Also, it calls into question like the cohesiveness of NATO nations, NATO alliances. At this point, a ceasefire is just cementing Russian gains, and it compromises Ukraine's sovereignty too much, and it's too great of a compromise to reach right now, which is why, all in all, Ukraine should not accept a ceasefire deal from Russia. Thank you.